Hello and welcome everyone. In this video or tutorial, we will be going over the data manager that my friend Okeanskiy made, which is basically a module that is for profile service, or like it basically manages, or it kind of like it's like a module that makes it easy to use profile service. And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm not going to explain really how profile service works in any sort of way, or like how what it does to and that other data stores can't do. I'm just going to go over the code that Okeanskiy made and make it like a lot more clear and explain line by line exactly what is going on here. Because I know when I first read it, I was like, man, what the heck? What the actual like what is happening here? So, I'm going to shed the lights into I'm going to shed the lights for new players or new scripters who are trying to use profile service and are using the tutorial that Okeanskiy made. And I'm just gonna make this a lot more clear. So I've also modified it a little bit, as you can see, but I'll explain it later. So firstly, profile service, you can use it directly, of course, but it's it's usually used in like a combination of a module that you make or another person makes, which makes like um creating like actually no, let me rephrase that. So basically, profile service is sort of like a wrapper for data store service. It's not like an actual script that like handles your data. It's just a module that it has a lot more functionality that just regular Roblox data stores cannot provide. So in this data manager, we can see the usage of profile service, and we can see the function that this data manager gives us to get the data of the profile. So, but before we get into that, we actually have to see what is like the meat. What is the meat in this code? We just want to know. So, firstly, this pretty self-explanatory. You're just declaring replicate storage, which is this. Whoops, this isn't supposed to be here. And players, which we will need because I mean we obviously need to know when the player's added and when the player's removed to know if we want to have the data be like stored, or if we want the data to be opened and used. And the next thing, so you have this data manager variable, and what this variable is for is basically it's just for the module. It's just simple stuff. If you know how modules work, then this shouldn't be no surprise. This is just our table, and what we do with this table is we just put a function in it and that we can use in other scripts. In our case, our function is gets, or it should be a name, call, or method, however you want to call it, and then we return that table so we can use it however we please. So the next thing, this is what I think I when I first read it, I came to have a bunch of trouble and this part as well. But don't worry, it's actually not that hard at all. So basically, profile store is basically just another way, or if you're already familiar with data stores, this is just another way of saying something like data store, like a service. Okay, get service, data store service. Capitalize the S. It's like doing something like this. Data store gets data store, and then this. So, but the main difference between this and this is that this has a sort of like default table or default like sort of data that is like already gonna be like hooked onto the player when they first have their data store, when we first load their profile. So what's happening here is this get profile store function basically needs a key, and this key is basically a sort of like folder that we have in Roblox servers that's gonna have like all the stuff that we're gonna have, all the tables that all these players data are gonna have, and it's the same thing we're doing here. So if you understand how this works, you will understand how this works like very clearly. And basically what this part is, if you're still confused about this, it's basically a sort of like default value that like when you load this profile and there's like nothing in it, like there's a completely new player, this table will already be like loaded in there for them, so you don't have to like manually see or like manually create a table or manually have some sort of like default value, and profile service already does that for you, which is quite nice. So we have that. This, as I said before, is the equivalent of just getting a data store with normal data store service. So I can delete that. And our next thing, we have profiles. So profiles, this is basically a table that houses all the sort of like all the sort of data that each player has, and it sort of serves as like a cache system where we could just like index a player and then we get their profile, and this makes it super easy to integrate it. As we can see here, we just have to do profiles and then we can index the player. And what confused me the most is that why we are indexing player and not something like player.userid. And what I think the reason is that it just makes your code like a lot less cluttered, because right here we have to use it because we're using a string, we can't use objects. But for here, since we have the luxury of using Lua, we can index it with basically anything, and this also includes stuff like players, which makes this work in the way it's working right here. So basically, as a summary, profiles is basically a table that houses a table of each player's data, or each player's, not a table of each player's data, but like it houses each player's profile, as we can see by these lines right here. And profile, which we will get into the meat and bones later, profile, as a quick rundown, is basically the sort of like table we already put inside like our sort of like profile store. So it's basically getting that sort of table that we have modified or changed in any sort of other script. That's gonna be their profile basically. So in the next few lines, we have these two functions, onPlayerJoin and onPlayerMoved. You can see by their names, they're kind of self-explanatory. This function runs when the player joins. This function runs when the player moves, connected to these events. Easy peasy. And on this player join, we have our parameter, obviously the player, because that's what the event is for. But we see profile again. This profile, we get our sort of like data store, or in more realness, it's our profile store. But we get this and then we load our profile async. And what this is doing, it's basically a sort of mix between get async and set async, because we can both read and write to the data at the same time. But it also has some other functionality with the profile that get async and set async don't have. So right now, what this is doing is it's basically setting a key, and we want this key to be specifically to the player, because we want no one else to share the same key, because we don't want anyone else to share the same data. Like, you don't want one person to have 5 guns and then magically another person has the same amount of guns as that person has. We just don't want that. We don't want like any sort of like data to clash with each other. And to stop that is that we have these unique identifiers that are hooked onto the player, which is their user ID, and we can use that as a key, and it will basically make it so no single person can have the same key. So every single person has their own separate like data table that we have right here. And force load, you can look more into Okeanskiy's video. This is basically a sort of way that stops like kind of like hackers from doing stuff and stuff. It's hard to explain here, but he can explain it much better than I can, because he's read more on what profile service really is. So now that we have the profile of the player with their unique key, which is this, we can actually do stuff with it. So their profile is basically going to be the table with their data, with these events and with these functions that pertain to that data, and how we can do stuff with it. So of course we want to see if this profile even exists. We want to see if they're not in like some other place or hacking, or like they're doing some weird stuff to modify their stuff. So we want to actually check if they actually have a profile, and if they don't for whatever reason, which they should, because it should already come like preloaded when you do low profile sync, we kick them. Yes, we kick them because they're most likely bugging all over the place. So now that we have this we have profile listen to release. Wow. So this, when I first saw this, I was like, man, this makes no sense. But this is basically what profile service is trying to do. Is they're trying to imitate Roblox's events. So you know how you can do it's gonna be super simple, but you know how you can do players.player added, and then we can connect it to a function. This is the exact same thing this is doing, except it's listening for something else. It's listening to when the profile gets released. So it's listening, as I said before, it's listening to when the profile gets released, and when they get released, it executes this function. So it's gonna execute releasing the profile, which basically means like setting the profile free because the player is not there anymore, or they got kicked, or they left too early. So we release that profile, and we not eradicate that data, but we eradicate it from the script we have, not from Roblox's servers. There's data is still safe. We just want it so it doesn't use up extra space, right? Because we're not going to be accessing their data when they're not in the game. That doesn't, unless you have like some sort of leaderboard stuff. But that's for other stuff. So then we kick the player. The player should obviously not even be there because the profile is not there. So you can't do anything with it. So we just kick them, because if you don't kick them, this comes with some sort of problems with stuff with session locking. Okeanskiy can explain more on why we need this, but yes. And this, so player is descendants of players. So this is basically happens when, because doing load profile sync, since the way profile service is set up, they have to do a bunch of like setup things, and they have to like set up all this stuff to have the profile be loaded in a correct way, and not be some sort of mess or jumble stuff. So since that takes a long time, we have to actually check if they're in the game anymore, and if they're not, we just want to release the profile because we're not going to be using it anymore, which that relates to them. Leads to the profile being released and the player getting kicked if they're not there already. But if they actually are there and are actually playing the game, we want to have their profile be in this profiles table. As we said before, this basically houses all the profiles of the players, which you can see right here. We have the table, we index the player. Each time we do this, it will get our profile because that is what we set it to. So profiles, we index the player of profiles, and then we set it as profile. Wow. So this is used for ease of access, as I've said before. And yeah, there really isn't much to it. This is just so we can access the profile, and access the data, and access all the sort of like attributes and properties this profile has. So the next thing, on player remove. This is what happens when the player gets removed. It's super easy. We just get the profile of the player by indexing the player in the profiles table. This will get the player's profile. That sounds weird, but it just gets the player profile. That's it. It checks if the profile is there. If it is, then we want to release it. It's basically gets rid of the data so we don't use it and occupy any more space than we need to. Not actually like deleting the data from like Roblox server, but just deleting the data so it's not using up any sort of space in the already running game. So now that we have that, we connect them, easy peasy, and this data manager get. So basically, this we have this parameter. This is when we actually use this data manager and require it and actually want to use the sort of data from the player. And as we said before, this basically line is copied the same from here. It gets the profile of the player we want to have, and we get with this profile we get all the sort of functionality this profile has with like its data that it has, which we have the default from here, and it has a sort of like functions which we can like release it, we can listen to it being released, stuff like that. Now, since the reason I have this, because this actually isn't in Okeanskiy's video, is that I use gets like immediately like after they join, because I want to get like the sort of weapons they have or the sort of clothing they have, and I have this get and I need it like right now when the player joins. But since profiles don't load immediately, I have to wait. And what this is doing is it's checking, okay, if the profile is not there, we must loop, and if the player suddenly left, we just stop running entirely. So we wait a bit so there isn't sort of like script exhaustion. Then we return data manager get player. Now this is kind of confusing, I know at first, because this sort of uses recursion. If you're not used to it, it gets pretty weird pretty fast. But basically what this is doing is, since it's returning, it's stopping the loop and then just like cycling back. So it goes back, gets the profile again, checks if it's there. If it's not, wait a bit, get the data, or get the profile data, loop back, redo until you actually have a profile, which then you can continue. And then after you continue, of course, you can then return the profile data, and the profile data is basically this table right here, which we can modify and change however we may like. And that's basically it. Congratulations, if you knew all that, you are a master at profile service now, because now you can just go out and use this data manager, require it however you may like it, and use this function and use it as you please. And that is all. I hope you've learned something new, and I hope I helped you in your scripting journey. And of course, I am Itzo. If you have any questions, please go in the comments and ask them, or you can ask me in Discord. My Discord is Itzo #1592. That is all. Later, guys.